the same time as global disarrangement is giving birth to signs of distress, it is throwing up phenomena of spectacular and haunting strangeness. Beautiful and uncanny marvels pass daily through our virtual atmosphere, through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, trailing the weird incandescence that must once have attached itself to Halley's Comet or the Northern Lights. I became so fascinated by their eerie charisma that I began to collect them. In 2018, then the world's fourth hottest year on record, ancient things made themselves known over the Northern Hemisphere summer. Severe droughts in Europe, in which rainfall in some places was 3% of the usual quota, caused rivers in Germany to disgorge unexploded bombs from the Second World War. Archaeologists in Norway recovered thousands of objects, including a wool tunic and broken tools going back as far as 2,000 years from the scree-covered edges of Opland's melting glaciers. Over the 2018 summer in the United Kingdom, the footprints of vanished Roman mansions, airfields, Victorian grand homes, and prehistoric settlements manifested in grassed fields and parks. Straw yellow or lush emerald green on lighter green, these weird patterns were parch marks, ghostly scars of human activity that revealed themselves as the land dried and grasses died off. There was writing too, in the form of the dozen hunger stones that emerged from the drought-stricken Elbe River near Desin in the Czech Republic, which recorded low water levels caused by mega-droughts dating as far back as 1417. The inscriptions in German are also warnings to future generations. Wenn du mich siehst, dann weine. One from 1616 read, "If you see me, weep." "If you see me, weep" seems like pertinent advice for living in the Anthropocene, in which, among other portents, once-in-a-100-year events are becoming increasingly frequent. In his essay on the uncanny, Sigmund Freud makes a distinction between experiences of the uncanny in real life, which in his experience were rare, and their appearance in fiction, which he generally found more affecting. These days, the ratio seems to be reversed. Amitav Ghosh opens The Great Derangement by recalling the moment on 17th of March 1978, when he was caught in the middle of the first tornado to hit Delhi in its recorded meteorological history, going on to argue that we are more likely to confront the weird signs of damaged nature in our everyday reality than in fiction, which often avoids such events as sensational and contrived. At the same time, scientists such as Robert Larter of the British Antarctic Survey are beginning to borrow terms which derive from fairy tale and folklore, like sleeping giants, to describe increasingly fragile polar ice sheets, with their capacity, once melting, becomes irreversible for global devastation. Yet I have to confess that seeing a world possessing agency has never seemed that strange to me. That's partly due to my own nature, and partly because I came of age with some small sense of how Indigenous cosmologies already offer a powerful rebuff to our deafness to the earth. Reading both Freud and Latour, I'm struck by the thought that the knowledge of a world whose many elements have their own interconnected stories to tell has never been lost by the Indigenous cultures that Western modernity hasn't entirely colonised. Instead of importing Latour's notions, we can learn as much, if not more, from Indigenous Australians' rich and ongoing understanding of country, which encompasses not just geographical landscape, but all living things, seasons, stories, and ancestral lore, in which people and animals and phenomena like the sun and moon are conscious moral agents dispersing knowledge across a sentient cosmos. Indigenous writers like Bunurong author Bruce Pascoe, Tagalaka filmmaker Victor Stephenson, and Dharawal weather knowledge holder Fran Bodkin have written about the long histories of Indigenous land care, meteorology, and astronomy, which involve reading relationships and signs within cycles accrued over thousands of years. Aboriginal people look after country, and it looks after them. Meanwhile, as Western science advances, but also in some ways catches up with Indigenous knowledge, so much of what it once viewed as fanciful about the Earth's intelligence continues to become real. At this moment, when they are most under assault, we are beginning to understand the extraordinary interconnections of nature's systems. Scientists have discovered, for example, that trees communicate and share food via mycorrhizal networks, which they've jokingly dubbed the Wood Wide Web. I'll do that again. Scientists have discovered, for example, that trees communicate and share food via mycorrhizal networks, which they've jokingly dubbed the Wood Wide Web. Even our own bodies, it turns out, are only roughly half human, the other half made up of about 160 different bacterial genomes. Developmental biologists like Scott F. Gilbert are even suggesting that we consider ourselves as holobionts, combinations of host and microbial community. Next to this, economic models of management and sustainability seem more and more like magical thinking. What use will our seed banks be without companion species of plants or pollinators, whose relationships have developed over millions of years? The challenge ahead is not only to recognise that it is rational to hear the uncanny messages from our present, but also to allow ourselves to feel fear, awe and rage equivalent to its terrific grandeur. Well, look, I think like most people who began their writing life as writers of fiction and novelists, we've been going through a very great period of reconsideration and anxiety about what the novel can do in the present, and that is still an ongoing question for me. And so I was attracted to the immediacy of non-fiction and the supple form of the essay, to be able to really write with the urgency and the ability to keep up with terrific ongoing change in my collection. We are at a moment, as the subtitle of my book suggests, of we all know it, of passing various terrifying tipping points, of being within a great acceleration, an emotional great acceleration, I think, and an intellectual great acceleration, as well as the physical great acceleration of the Anthropocene. And I think the challenge for everyone is to try and find a language and a form of writing that's able to at least try to find some sort of equivalence to what is almost, changes that are so enormous that they're almost unthinkable. What the philosopher Timothy Morton describes as hyperobjects, something like global heating. For example, I would say also species loss is such a huge, sticky, almost an entity that it's almost impossible to sort of think around the edges of it. And yet we have to try and find some sort of equivalent language. And, you know, in the course of things, I think that writers and creatives generally are kind of up against a different form of storytelling. And I write about that in my book, which is what I call the language of glamour. And you can see that language, you know, and more people are probably attuned to that language than are going to be reading books or, sadly, you know, going to the theatre or so on. And that is, in advertising, in reality TV shows, there's a sense that the world can, if something is wrong, it can always be reversed. If one doesn't like one's appearance, one can always use it. That there's always going to be some part of the world that is a refuge, that is untouched by these sort of global troubles. And so I think that, you know, my job as a writer is to, and our job as creatives generally, is to offer a language that is the opposite of glamour, that's complex, that's tricky, that tries to feel the weight of these huge changes, and that resists as much as possible this idea that there is a possible that we can live out in an alternate reality, which unfortunately is a reality that we often live in, of glamorous, changeable, not irrevocable, not irrevocable world. And yet, what I want to capture is this sense of urgency, of, if not finality, of enormous changes that we've started to experience through the mega fires in Australia of 2019 to 20, which we're starting to feel in the flooding, the aerial rivers that have been moving across Australia at the moment. These are the things that I think that we really need to try to find some commensurate language for, and to help people express these things. Since I wrote my book, I think that change is already underway.